Today we're presented with a challenge unlike we've ever seen in hosting a competition of this sort. So for those of you who weren't here earlier today, we have a very tight schedule. Over the course of the day, all of our debaters compete in 4 rounds earlier in the day, which, as you can imagine, we want to make sure we stay on time to get here. This morning, someone put a waffle in a microwave, and that caused a half-hour delay as the fire alarm went on. We had to evacuate the entire museum. Our staff was able to rally around this and still get us here on time. And so to all of our staff who worked so hard to make sure that everything went swimmingly today, thank you as well. Now, effective communication has always been an essential part of our democratic republic, dating back to the printing presses of the Revolution, the extended public debates of Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln, Roosevelt's fireside chats over the radio during the Depression and then World War II, televised addresses from the Oval Office, and of course, as you just saw, President Reagan's famous call to tear down this wall. Now, it remains an essential part of what makes our country work, but the rules of communication have changed pretty drastically since the founding of our country. When the colonies declared independence in 1776, it took more than 5 weeks and a trip across the Atlantic before the British heard about it in their newspapers. Think about that, 5 weeks to get news. Today it seems inconceivable, right? Now with a device that fits in our pocket, anybody in this room could stream information, update the world on events that are happening in your neighborhood, and share what's happening just by opening up your phone and clicking on an app. So given the right set of circumstances, any one of us in this room could go viral. You could become an influencer. You could even change the course of history. So effectively harnessing the tools of communication then is the challenge we have now. If you can do it, and you don't have the skill. If you can't do it, you don't have the skills, and you don't have the power, because there's a lot of power that comes from effective communication. The ability to reach anywhere in the world means that you have great power at your fingertips. And what do we know from Spider-Man about great power? Who's the Spider-Man fans? With great power comes great responsibility, right? No matter which Spider-Verse you're in, it holds true. So here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, this is our mission, to work with students from around the country to take that power and to take that responsibility incredibly seriously. To cultivate the next generation of thoughtful and informed and engaged citizens and leaders. To help develop the very sorts of young leaders you'll hear from in just a minute on this stage. We didn't just make this idea up. We got this idea from the namesake of our institution. In 1988, President Reagan said, "Since the founding of this nation, education and democracy have gone hand in hand. Thomas Jefferson not only wrote the Declaration of Independence and served as one of our most distinguished institutions of higher learning, the University of Virginia. He founded it. Jefferson and the founders believed that a nation that governs itself like ours must rely on an informed and engaged electorate. Speech and debate, for my money, is the best activity a student could engage in to become a guardian of democracy, to become a part of that informed and engaged electorate. These kids know their history, they know their facts, they know the issues, and they can communicate them effectively and impactfully. In fact, I think many of our politicians today could learn a thing or two from the students who participate in this program. President Reagan was obviously known for his optimism, and if you see, like we've seen here over the course of the last couple of days, these students, you too would have optimism for the future of our country. So our 16 finalists have been competing, and now we're down to the final 2. The stakes of the final round are significant. The winner of tonight's championship will receive a $10,000 college scholarship. That's a lot. College is expensive. I don't know if you've seen the news. But also, not bad for 40 minutes of work, right? Pretty good return. For those of you who may not be familiar with academic debate, I want to point out a few of the differences from the debates you might see on TV. So first, I want to give you our topic for this evening. So whether our final round judges here, everyone in our audience, want to make sure you're clear on what the topic is. So it is resolved, on balance, a livable minimum wage mandate would harm small businesses in the United States. So in just a second, we're going to invite our competitors up and we're going to flip a coin. So sitting there right now, they don't know which side of this argument they're going to have. Right? So our political debaters, they know what their positions are on the argument before they take the stage, and they're ready. Right now, our 2 debaters don't. They'll know in just a minute, so don't hold it against them. And I want to ask each of you, whether you're a judge or a member of the audience who's going to determine the winner, to put aside your personal opinion. No matter if you're a small business owner, if you're somebody who has a strong opinion on a livable minimum wage, put those aside for right now. We don't want you to vote on what you already think to be true. We want you to vote on the power of communication that you see in our two national finalists. Who communicates their ideas the best? So each of you should have received a judging guide, and you went through our judges training, so you're going to be ready. On the inside of the judging guide, you should find some explanations of what to be looking for. And those of us who work here on a daily basis, who've seen President Reagan's speeches, know that there's a beauty, that there's a resonance, that there's a power that comes with effective communication. So please be on the lookout for that tonight as you watch these two competitors. Now, before I introduce you to the two finalists, I want to introduce you to our fantastic panel of final round judges. We are extremely privileged to have with us tonight. So our first judge is going into her final year of undergraduate studies at Chapman University, where she's majoring in biological science with an emphasis in anatomy and physiology. She's been conducting biomedical lab research and was recently published in the journal Polymers. She's gained extensive knowledge and skill through her internships with the Harvard Medical School Center for Global Health Diversity and the Ronald Reagan Institute's own Leadership in the American Presidency program in Washington, D.C. She plans to use those skills to pursue a career in international health policy and reform. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Melissa Coyle. Next up, a rising sophomore at Northwestern University studying history and political science. Currently, he's involved in Global Brigades, an organization that promotes sustainable international development, as well as Northwestern Political Union, which is a group that works to foster civil, bipartisan political discourse. He plans to go to law school after completing his undergraduate degree. Ladies and gentlemen, the defending champion and only two-time national champion in the history of the Great Communicator debate series, Mr. John Michael Magliore. Our next judge was a professional broadcast journalist, writer, and marketer for more than 20 years. She produced The Larry King Show for Mutual Radio Network, Tomorrow for NBC, CBS Morning News with Diane Sawyer and Bill Curtis, and also co-wrote, produced, and directed From Apollo to the Stars with Gene Roddenberry, who you might know as the creator of Star Trek. She has also published feature stories in the LA Times and the Washington Post, and was an on-camera reporter for CNN in Seoul, Korea, and Kiev, Ukraine. Currently, she serves as the Director of Development for Procon.org. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Jeannie Ring. And our last judge has worked closely with President Reagan and his family, serving in various positions since 1984. From 1995 to 2004, she served as the Chief of Staff and official spokesperson in the office of Ronald Reagan, and now serves as the Chief Administrative Officer here at Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joanne Drake. And of course, our fifth judge is you, the audience. So, there you go. Yeah. I would list each and every one of your credentials, but we would be here for quite some time. And now, I'm going to introduce to the stage our 2019 Great Communicator Debate national finalists. So finalist number one, from Stamford, Connecticut, who qualified in our online competition, Mr. Aaron Ravine. And our second national finalist, Ben Lux, from Denton, Texas, who qualified in our Greater Texas Regional. So now I'm going to invite John to the stage as our defending national champion. He's going to flip a coin. We're going to ask Ben to call it. It's a commemorative Ronald Reagan coin. So the heads is Ronald Reagan's very handsome face. The tail is the seal of the President of the United States. So without further ado, John, you're going to flip, Ben, you're going to call.
Which side is heavier?
He called heads, and it is heads. So Ben will choose
I'll go affirmative.
The affirmative side. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to get started. Good luck to you both.
Can everybody hear me? Cool. Everybody ready? Great. Let's go ahead and get started. America is the land of small business. Small businesses are the heart and soul of our booming economy. Whenever they do well, we all do well. Just like I'm sure you wouldn't want your hands to be tied, we shouldn't be artificially tying the hands of the lifeblood of our country. How are we doing that? Minimum wage increases have historically been met by regular small business owners having to lay off some of their employees, increase their prices, and decrease their employees' hours. That's tantamount to tying their hands. Those responses also offset any of the extra money those employees would make from that wage increase. Owning a small business isn't as easy, breezy, beautiful as it may seem. Your average small business owner doesn't get benefits, doesn't get paid vacation, and retires with less than $100,000 to their name. It isn't super glamorous, but without that middle class, our economy would be sunk. That's why it's so important that we look at the whole picture when discussing the resolution, that on balance, a livable minimum wage would harm small businesses in the United States. The House recently passed a bill that would increase our current federally mandated minimum wage to $15 an hour. Presidential candidate Bernie Sanders has been quoted many times asking for companies like Walmart to pay their employees a living wage of $15 an hour. A living wage will hurt small businesses, and it's actually a historical fact. Let me tell you a story. The living wage movement got started in the mid-1990s in Baltimore. Baltimore then mayor disregarded economists' advice to him that implementing a living minimum wage would harm Baltimore's economy. After the mayor signed the new wage law into law, his supporters hailed him as, quote, saving the poor working class citizens. Instead of helping the poor, Baltimore saw its economy crash. 58,000 people lost their jobs in Baltimore, while the rest of Maryland added 120,000 new jobs, and the many other cities prospered. Workers and companies moved or lost their jobs, while companies cut expenses. In Baltimore's case, the increased minimum wage was only a 43% increase that resulted in almost 60,000 people losing their jobs. One city and a 43% increase. To go to $15 right now would be an 106.9% increase and would affect the whole country. Companies fled Baltimore. There is no fleeing a federally mandated minimum wage. Across the board means no escape. It's no question that more than doubling our current minimum wage to meet the living wage standard is a fairly radical idea. And the problem with radical ideas is they're often met with radical unintended consequences. Seattle has recently experienced some of these radical unintended consequences whenever they put $15 as their minimum wage. The Washington Post tells us this, quote, when Seattle officials voted 3 years ago to incrementally boost the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour, they'd hoped to improve the lives of low-income workers. Yet according to a major new study, the hike has had the opposite effect. They've cut their payrolls, putting off new hiring, reducing hours, or letting their workers go, the study found. The cost to low-wage workers in Seattle outweighed the benefits by a ratio of 3 to 1. If you want to help low-wage workers, increasing how much they cost isn't beneficial for them. Seattle is also a perfect example of how increasing our current wage 106.9% definitely hurts small businesses, and it does so inherently. Why do I believe this? Whenever you raise the price of labor so drastically, like companies in Seattle and Baltimore experience respectively, you're going to see negative consequences. In Baltimore, businesses were able to escape by moving away from the wage increase, but implementing this overall livable minimum wage isn't escapable and results in businesses having to choose losing options. The business can either be open for fewer hours or reduce the cost by laying off their employees. Why is laying off an employee so bad? An employee is actually an asset that appreciates in value over time. Why is this so? The longer you have an employee, the better they become for your business. They learn the ins and outs. They become a part of the family. They can actually work effectively in that business environment. And losing them means that you're losing a big part of your company, that appreciating asset. And number two, I'm pretty sure that obviously all of us can agree that whenever a business is open for less time, that it's probably bad for the business. They can have less business and they're not actually as available to their customers anymore. So either one of those options hurts businesses because they lose all of those options that we currently have. I think options here are the important part. We shouldn't be closing their options. We should actually be opening up more of their options. The end result is that both small businesses owners and their employees are hurt. We should actually give them a choice to avoid this hurt by not siding with a living wage of $15 an hour. Increasing our current minimum wage to meet this living wage high standard, I think, is a lose-lose situation. And I prefer win-wins. I don't know about you guys. Businesses win whenever they have lower costs. We shouldn't be artificially tying their hands and drastically increasing their costs. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Before I begin my time, I would like to just say a few words. First, I'd like to thank my family for being here. They are pretty much the biggest group here. There's 8 of them in the audience, and I thank them for taking the time out of their lives to come here and support me. And I'd like to thank my grandparents who couldn't be here. I'd also like to thank everyone who supported me at home. I'd like to thank the Stanford High debate team, and I'd like to thank my coach, Jeremy White. Now, I will begin if the judges are ready and my opponent is ready. Alrighty then. Well, let us begin in 3, 2, 1, go. The United States has a long history of vested interest in the improvement of its people's quality of life. This makes sense. Our leaders are re-elected if their constituents are happy. Because of this, it is no wonder that work, a centerpiece of American life, has received ample attention from politicians. Since the progressive era led by populists at the start of the 20th century, all the way to the current fight for a living minimum wage, Americans have shown that they are committed to making jobs safer, fairer, and more rewarding. People like Ben fear these large-scale reforms. They claim that a living wage would, on balance, harm our small businesses. But that couldn't be further from the truth. First, let us go over what exactly a living wage is. It is an hourly pay that allows an American to provide for themselves without fear of financial ruin or requiring welfare to survive. This, of course, is dependent on where an individual resides. It is more expensive to live in San Francisco than it is to live in Bakersfield. Thankfully, an MIT economics professor, Dr. Amy Glassmeyer, has already estimated the living wages for every region in this country, taking into account local living and healthcare costs along with transportation. Now, moving on from the logistics, the clearest way in which higher wages will in fact not harm small businesses is in the impact it has on employee morale. When someone is paid more, they are more likely to be satisfied. This has a variety of benefits for all businesses. For one, satisfied workers work harder due to basic psychology. If you believe you are being treated fairly or favorably by your employer, you will appreciate and seek to satisfy them. If you receive enough to live comfortably, you would do more to avoid being fired. You wouldn't show up late, and you wouldn't go on your phone at work. These behaviors are just much more common in low-paying industries because the less you're earning, the less you have to lose, and the less likely you will care to lose it. A satisfied workforce has the additional benefit to business owners of decreasing turnover rates. Again, if someone values their income, they are less likely to quit and seek a new job. This especially benefits small businesses. Hiring costs for new low-wage earners are about 16% of their yearly earnings, so small businesses lose thousands just because of dissatisfied employees. Not only that, but during periods of low unemployment, like the one we are currently in, low-wage turnover rates skyrocket, and so do businesses' losses. It is for this reason that, according to Small Business Majority, a nonprofit dedicated to researching modest firms, roughly 85% of small business owners with payrolls already pay all of their employees substantially more than the minimum wage. A living wage mandate won't harm small businesses if they are already paying closer to the living wage than big businesses. This brings us to my next point. A living minimum wage mandate would help small businesses challenge massive, competition-squashing corporations. For the purposes of this debate, we should discuss the true underdogs. Any for-profit establishment with, say, 20 or less people on payroll earning less than $1 million a year. According to the Small Business Administration, a federal department dedicated to tracking small businesses, a whopping 90% of U.S. firms fit under this criteria. But let us break this number down further. 82% of small businesses do not have a payroll. This means that they are either entirely run by an individual or entirely family operated, meaning that any increase in the minimum wage would have no effect on them because they simply don't pay wages. In fact, it only serves to benefit them. Large corporations like Walmart would have to work harder to displace the local corner store because Walmart would need to increase the pay of their 1.5 million employees. So already on balance, we see that these mom-and-pop shops would in fact be strengthened, by a living wage mandate, by helping to level the playing field between big and small industry. Now, let us discuss a basic truth. Everyone desires a decent life. This desire leads Americans to seek the most income they can possibly receive. Millions are leaving our workforce to sustain their families off of welfare, and it doesn't help that the current system incentivizes unemployment. In 35 states, the typical welfare recipient receives more than the local minimum wage. In 11, recipients receive more than the average entry-level teacher. Why would you look for a job if you could better provide for your children without one? This huge loss in employment comes with a cost. Less workers means less hard workers, and hard workers are hard to come by. A living wage allows for impoverished Americans to better provide for themselves and their children, thus bringing them back to our workforce and thus small businesses. With all of this said, it is clear that there are many factors in play with a living minimum wage. It isn't as simple as increased pay equating to harmed businesses because the world isn't that simple. A living minimum wage would improve worker productivity. It would allow for small businesses, the backbone of the American economy, to compete with big businesses. It would greatly strengthen and expand our workforce, and it is for these reasons that I negate this resolution.
Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that my colleague mentioned to you guys was the idea that a living wage can kind of change. And what he mentioned here is that, well, by city, by county, and by state, it may be different. What I think is really important for us to understand is the resolution. That we're talking here about this minimum mandate, meaning it isn't going to change by city, how it's one. And if you look at right now, and all of you were to Google living wage right now, I guarantee to you the first 20 pages on Google are all going to either be Bernie Sanders asking for a 15 or how the House recently passed a $15 living wage. Therefore, all the weight of evidence shows that what we're referencing here is 15 as a living wage, is it beneficial for small businesses or does it hurt small businesses? And all the evidence shows to us how it's actually harmful for small businesses. His next point that he gives to you was working harder. And I think we can categorize the two main points of this round into two big ideas or two big questions. The first big question here is what is best for the workers? And the second big question is what is best for the small business? So obviously here, the first question. My colleague mentions how, well, it's best for the worker whenever we decrease turnover rates. They're not being turned over as much. They still have their job. And they're improving their work. We're also giving them a decent standard of living. My first response here, kind of what I want to point you to, I don't want to just point you to studies. I think studies can kind of be washed in this debate round. I want to point you to actual examples in the real world. I gave to you two, in Baltimore and Seattle. And in both of those examples, who was benefited? Really, nobody was benefited. Why? Because small businesses lost their employees, and those low-wage workers lost their job. 60,000 people lost their job in Baltimore, while the rest of Maryland added 120,000 new jobs. So they put in a living wage, and what happened? Their city lost people. The unemployment rate skyrocketed. They lost 60,000 jobs. And in Seattle, the evidence shows to us how in a 3-to-1 ratio, it actually hurt those low-wage workers. So if you really want the benefits of helping those low-wage workers, the best way to help them isn't to make them more expensive to a business. It's actually for them to maintain their jobs. The CBO tells us, or the Congressional Budget Office tells to us, how at $15 an hour, we're going to lose 3.7 million Americans to unemployment, meaning we're going to lose 3.7 million Americans' jobs. If you were to ask me the question of do I want to make minimum wage or do I not want to work at all, I'm going to tell you that I want to make some kind of money at least. If their quality of life here is the important point here, them having a job astronomically boosts their quality of life and makes it way more decent than them lacking a job and living in total poverty in that respect. The next big question here is, what is best for the small business? I think the instances that I give to you here of Baltimore and Seattle haven't been responded to. Why are they so important? Because they actually happened in the real world. They're not just economists' predictions, though economists are really cool and they give to us great predictions. They're actually what happened in the real world. And in Baltimore in the real world, whenever they increased their wage only by 43%, less than half, they saw massive reductions or massive increases in unemployment to the tune of around 60,000. If we were to do this all over America right now, it wouldn't be a 43% increase. The increase would be 106.9%. That 106.9% or more than double makes that individual who wants to go get a job, it makes them twice as expensive. You and I know that whenever things become more expensive, we buy less of them. A small business is going to buy less work, buy less employees, because now they're twice as expensive. They have to cut their costs somehow, and the way they do so is by reducing their hours or reducing the amount of operating hours they actually open for in the first place. So when it comes down to those two big questions for this round, what is best for the low-wage worker? The evidence shows to us here how it's best for the low-wage worker whenever you don't put into place a $15 living wage. What is best for the small business? It's best for the small business whenever you don't make individuals so expensive so a small business can't afford them. In Baltimore, they fled. They moved city lines. If we were to have a federally mandated $15 minimum wage, there is no escaping it. There is no crossing city lines. We're stuck paying it. And the evidence shows to us here how on a 3-to-1 ratio, we hurt the low-wage workers and also hurt the small businesses. Thank you so much.
Judges ready? Ben ready? Alrighty then. I would like to briefly talk about these real-world examples that my opponent has brought up. So he brought up Seattle and Baltimore, and of course I haven't responded to them yet because it hasn't been my rebuttal yet, but allow me to. So let's first talk about Baltimore. Baltimore has been, sadly enough, a dying city for many years now, and it was a dying city before their minimum wage hikes as well. So to attribute their increase in unemployment to simply the minimum wage hike is kind of conflation and misleading. So now let's talk about Seattle. He talked about a recent study in Seattle, and while that was recent, I believe the studies that he is citing are coming from 2017. Now let's talk about what happened in Seattle as recently as 2019. At the beginning of the year, Seattle's unemployment rate was still pretty low, just like the rest of the country. But since they reached their $15 minimum wage, which coincidentally has been estimated as their living wage by Dr. Amy Glassmeyer, their unemployment rate has gone down 20%. Not only that, but let's talk about small businesses specifically. How are they doing in Seattle? Well, let's look at Paychex, a company that my great auntie, who is here today, works for. Paychex tracks nationally small businesses, and they are the leading force in this regard. Seattle ranks as number 6 in small business growth. So clearly what my opponent is saying, that this harms small businesses in regards to the two cities that he talked about, isn't necessarily the case. But now let's move on and talk about the things that he did not refute. He did not refute the fact of the matter that 82% of small businesses do not have a payroll. These people are not going to lose jobs, they're not going to have to cut hours because they are not going to be affected by this mandate. And he also said that my refutation to it needing to be $15 nationally is irrelevant because Bernie Sanders says that the living wage is $15. Last time I checked, respect to Bernie Sanders, but I don't think he determines reality. I would instead default to what PhDs and economists have suggested, and even to what you guys suggest. Do you believe that you need to pay as much money in San Francisco to be able to survive as you would need to in Louisiana? No, San Francisco is extremely expensive. No one likes living there and buying things there. So now let's talk more about other things in regards to welfare and people rejoining the workforce. My opponent has not refuted my claims that people would rejoin if a livable wage would offer them more than welfare would, because they would. And any small business owner, like my parents who happen to be one, will tell you that they are in desperate need for hard workers. And what people are doing on welfare is they're leaving the workforce because they won't be able to get it if they have a job. So when they rejoin the workforce, small businesses and any benefit business will be able to benefit it. Other small businesses would have the playing field leveled between them and large corporations because, like I said, even for the corporations that don't have a payroll, 85% of them already pay substantially more than the minimum wage. Most minimum wages jobs are actually provided for by large corporations, over 60%. So they are the ones who are going to be impacted by this the most. And if anything, these are the people who we need to be impacted the most. Because small businesses, like I said before, are the backbone of our economy. We need to equalize the playing field and not let these monopolies take over America any more than they already have. So finally, let me just touch on a few more things that he said and how that clashes with what I've been saying. He discussed how people would need to decrease hours and fire employees, but that clearly hasn't been the case in Seattle because their unemployment rate has gone down and they still remain number 6 for small business growth. They not only that, but that is almost an insult to small business owners. They are hardworking people who, if you face them with an obstacle, they aren't immediately going to shut down their business or hinder their employment. What they're going to do is they're going to rework their shifts. Maybe they'll take an extra shift. This is what these people do. My parents would work late nights working 16 hours a day because this is what small business owners do. They work against the opposition that is posed to them and new obstacles. And for that reason, I believe we must negate this resolve. Thank you. Now we enter into crossfire.
Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Great. Let's go ahead and get started. You and I can agree that a small business gets out there and they set their bottom line, what they expect to make by the end of the year. And if we face them with some kind of new input cost or something becomes more expensive, they're going to find some way to compensate for it so they can make the same amount of money or try to rebound from it, right?
Well, yeah, that's why I talked about them taking extra shifts.
Okay, so your idea here is that whenever they're faced with an input cost of shifts being more expensive, they're going to take more shifts.
Well, let's discuss that very quickly.
Okay.
So 82% of them won't be affected, and then in regards to the remaining 18%, 85% of those people are already paying substantially more than the minimum wage, right? So let's assume we're talking about that 3% of small businesses that aren't paying substantially more than the minimum wage for their employees. These 3%, yes, some of them won't.
You would
be
agree
able
that
to
your
take
payroll number, though, that your point talking about how the majority pay above was how 85% with payrolls pay above the minimum wage.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's what I said. Okay, sorry. So that remaining 3% of small businesses that are unaccounted for, I will admit that some of them will be harmed by this resolution. But many of them will still be able to succeed and go beyond these issues because what they do is they will take extra shifts. Of course, I lament the few small businesses that will feel the growing pains and may close down because of this. But what we are arguing for is what on balance will benefit small businesses in the United States. Now, may I ask you a question?
Of course.
So something that has frequently come up in this style of debate is, and in this topic in particular, is Keynesian economics. We actually saw it in that video played earlier. So Keynesian economics is essentially the theory that people on the lower ends of the economic spectrum, if you increase their purchasing power, they will be able to spend it back into the economy and benefit small businesses and large businesses alike. Well, how do you respond to that?
It's called the broken window fallacy. The whole idea is that if I break your window, well, you're going to have to spend some money every once in a while, and therefore I boost the economy by breaking your window. The reason it's debunked is because I'm not actually adding any new money to the market because the money comes from your pocket and goes into buying a window instead of you taking your money and buying a cheeseburger. There's no difference here. Like my opponent mentions here, you increase their purchasing power, but who are you taking the money from? You're taking it away from small businesses, you're hurting them, and you're giving it to somebody else. You're not adding any new dollars. All that you're doing here is rearranging where the dollars are. You're not changing or adding any new. All that you're doing is changing where they are.
Just a brief spin on that, if time allows. That fallacy, let's talk about breaking a window, right?
Yeah, the broken window fallacy.
Yes, so the money will be largely coming out of large businesses, right? Because more than 60% of all minimum wage workers actually work for large businesses. So who fixes windows? Independent contractors, small businesses. These are the people that will get the money from these large corporations. And while it may not necessarily be suddenly improving the economy for everyone, what it will benefit are the independent contractors, like what my father used to do.
Was that a question?
No, that was an answer.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, I believe that is time.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
First of all, congratulations. You're both very compelling.
Thank you.
My question, really, I want you to imagine that you're running for president. Doesn't matter which ticket you're on. Well, let's imagine that it doesn't matter which ticket you're on.
The same one, same one.
Right? If you were to run for president on either ticket in a normal environment, would you include the position that you took today as part of your platform?
Ooh, minimum wage. I think that if I were running for president, I think at some point in time, I would obviously be forced to engage in topics or engage in discussions about the minimum wage. Our current president has engaged in talking about the minimum wage and whether it should be a living wage many times. And I think when it comes down to it, the overwhelming research that we found, I think a lot of debaters, we've talked about this all over dinner, there's a lot of research that shows that whenever you have these high input costs, that it can be harmful to businesses just in general. Obviously, there are different kind of businesses that can take the costs. A bigger business can obviously have, this kind of input costs and maybe survive a little bit more in comparison to a small business. But I guess to answer your question, I don't think that this would be the driving force of my campaign. I think that it may be something that I would engage in talking about and I wouldn't shy away from, but it wouldn't be, hey, vote for me because I'm going to decrease your wages or increase your wages.
And what I want to know is you believe your side.
What's up?
Do you believe in what you just said?
Do I believe in what I just
If
said?
you were president, would you include it on your platform because you believe?
Cross my heart, hope to die. My mom's over there. Yes, ma'am.
Aaron?
So, yes. But the longer answer for that is I would, of course, include it in my platform. For one, I believe it truly would benefit small businesses to have a living minimum wage to level the playing field between them and monopolies, because we all know that Amazon is just squashing small businesses left and right. But it goes further than that, because the small living minimum wage has the increased benefit to a campaign of being popular, because the people want it. The people want a higher minimum wage because in reality, since the 60s, the minimum wage has essentially been stagnant. The purchasing power, because of inflation, has gone down consistently year after year. I believe it's decreased its purchasing power by about a third. So this is what we need to do. We need to take back our democracy. We need to take back the power from these large monopolies, and we need to bring it back to small businesses. Again, the backbone of our economy.
And you believe your position today in your heart and soul?
I do.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question. Out of all of the men and women running for president or who currently have that spot, which one would you like to debate when you run for president?
Ooh, I don't think I shy away from a debate with any of them. I'd love to debate all of them.
Got to choose one.
If I had to choose one, oh geez, that's so mean.
Can I quickly go? Can I go while he's thinking? Marianne Williamson.
I think I'd want to debate Elizabeth Warren.
Respect.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Congratulations, gentlemen. You did a great job.
Thank you.
I'd like to drill down on this broken window analogy because I found myself a little bit off balance when you brought that up.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain it a little bit further?
Of
I
course.
know he questioned you closely on it, but
Yes, ma'am. The American Enterprise Institute kind of gives the best clarification, and they give an analogy for it. Talk about how if Alex works for a company, he works for a small business that's an ice cream parlor, and the ice cream parlor is run by Miss Susan, and Miss Susan gives Alex some extra money each week in the form of a living wage being boosted in his side. Therefore, he's going to make $10 more each week or $100 more each week. There's no new money being added to the market, and what that really means is that instead of Miss Susan spending the money, now it's Alex spending the money. There's no new extra $100. It's just a question of does Alex spend it or does Miss Susan spend it? The broken window fallacy is the idea that of Keynesian economics that if you bust down a window, it forces somebody to pay for that window. And the question then is it good for our economy to continually break things so we have to refix them? Should we carpet bomb a city in the hopes that we have to rebuild the city afterwards? Kind of like how war boosts GDP because we're spending so much to build so much. If you carpet bomb a city, well, isn't it good for the economy? And the answer is no, because that money could be spent elsewhere, like maybe improving upon the current situation or progressing it forwards.
I don't want to necessarily relitigate this, but do you have any additional points on that?
Well, I think I discussed that a little bit, but I'll touch on it
Yeah.
again. So initially, let's talk about the broken window fallacy. So I wouldn't even agree that it is a fallacy because historically throughout the United States we have used it and it has benefited us throughout recessions in the past. But even just talking about this debate in particular, I believe it was kind of a poor analogy for him to use because we aren't necessarily even talking about economic growth. We're talking about what benefits small businesses. And if you're taking money away from the big corporations and putting it in the hands of independent contractors like my father, you only stand to gain.
And one other question, what made you assume that the $15, I know you said that Bernie Sanders has said it,
Sure, so that I wasn't just because of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, if you were to Google living wage right now, it's only going to pull up. The predominant reason is because the House recently passed a bill that would make our federally mandated minimum 15.
Right, but it would be, but you're assuming that that's what it would be, that's what this resolution is referring to.
Oh, yes, ma'am. As the affirmative, it's my privilege and it's my burden to define the
No,
resolution.
I understand, yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
that it's federal. And you're assuming that it would be that if some bill were passed in Congress, that they would, do it by city.
Well, I just believe that $15 isn't necessarily what you need to live in the majority of the states in the United States. For example, I can list you a few really quickly. South Dakota's livable minimum wage has been estimated to be $10.38. Arkansas has been estimated to be $10.62, and the list goes on and on and on. So I don't believe that just because the House is passing something, that necessarily means the House is correct.
Yes, right, okay, thank you.
Congratulations to both of you. Nice job so far. I have two questions for each of you. First for Ben. So both you and Aaron have both talked about Seattle, and you disagree about what has happened. He has said your evidence is from 2017 and his is from 2019, and I just wanted to hear what your response is to his evidence that a $15 minimum wage led to a 20% decrease in unemployment.
Sure. So my evidence actually didn't come from 2017, which I was just going to mention here in just a minute. It came from 2019, talking about the 2017 raise of the minimum wage, which is important for us to look at. But yes, the Washington Post talking about it, but they're talking about whenever the wage, was raised to 15, in 2017. But the obviously analyzing it post 2017, they couldn't be analyzing it before. And I was actually going to question my opponent, and I was going to ask to see the evidence back at the table. And I think it's important for us to understand, and one clarification that I think could make here is that whenever you measure unemployment, you don't measure those who stopped looking for a job or who moved out of your state. And the big thing with Baltimore, and even in the instance of Sacramento, people moved to Nevada because it's an $8.25 wage in Nevada versus an $11.75 in Sacramento. So if you were to move or stop looking for work, the unemployment rate would obviously decrease because you've stopped looking for work or you've moved out of Seattle.
May I piggyback off of that?
Sure.
So in regards to the 2017, if his numbers are in fact coming from a Washington Post article from the 2019, I would instead default to the statistics provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics saying unemployment went down 20%. And in addition to people leaving the state to go to new areas, if the minimum wage is increasing and jobs are still coming into the city because small business growth is still happening in Seattle, I don't believe that people are going to be leaving because people want jobs with high minimum wage in an area where jobs are still being formed.
Employment. And I was just wondering if you could explain why that's a problem, whether that's a problem with the welfare system or with the minimum wage, and whichever you say, I want to know why. Like, why do we have to take one specific recourse, and why is the recourse that you select the better one?
So, two-folded answer to that. Initially, it is somewhat of a problem with the welfare state originally, but you need to think why the welfare state has become so important today. It's because wages have only just started to rise at a rate past inflation in 2018. So the real income of people living at the lower end of the spectrum has been going down over and over and over again every single year. So what you see is that people needed to go on welfare, and because welfare isn't a perfect system, it is indeed disincentivizing unemployment. It is incentivizing unemployment. So yes, people are being forced to go on welfare now, but there's also the problem with welfare incentivizing them to remain on it.
Okay, and then just one more question for each of you. For Ben, Obviously, you don't think that an increase in minimum wage would solve a lot of the issues that we're having with poverty. So I'm just wondering what you think. If this is not the proper recourse, is there any recourse, or do we just kind of have to live with the economic situation that we have right now?
For resolution on poverty, I think it's important for us to look at that there are only 542,000 Americans that make just the federal minimum wage. The rest of them, there's around 2.3 that live below the idea of a poverty line, and the majority of them are individuals working in things like restaurants that actually make whenever you do their tipped wages, a much higher wage than even $11 or $12. So looking at even those, it's kind of interesting to look at. They're making $12, but they're still living in poverty. And the question then becomes, are they actually living in poverty? What percentage of the population actually makes the federal minimum, and are they actually living in poverty? So of that 542,000 right now that just make federal minimum, more than half of those individuals are people that are in school, and half of those individuals are individuals like myself who worked a job over the summer, whose parents make way more than the minimum wage and aren't living in poverty. So I'm under my own stat, maybe living in poverty, but my situation that I'm living in isn't a poverty situation. And obviously, if you're a school student, it obviously seems really hard. I'm sure that you know, eating ramen all the time, it's like you're living in poverty, but you're living in poverty for a short while in the hopes of becoming a brilliant lawyer and making, I'm sure, a great salary here in the future. So that question of poverty, it's more like for these individuals a short-term poverty. And in instances of kids like myself that just worked over the summer, it really isn't poverty, even though technically it is qualified as that.
And then for Aaron, this will be the last question for me. You had mentioned earlier that an increase in the minimum wage and the creation of a livable wage is something that's very popular among the American public. And I'm just wondering if you think that that should be the standard for creating policies. Should we use what's popular in order to determine what policies we should implement? Or in other words, is the public always right about what the right thing to do is?
So I would dictate that answer to our founding fathers. We are a democratic republic. What does that mean? If we are a democratic republic, that means we have representatives, and they're supposed to do what the people want. But just because the people want something doesn't mean we should immediately go do it. First, we should look at the evidence. And as the evidence I have already presented to you all indicates, that a livable minimum wage would in fact benefit the United States and benefit small businesses in the United States. And because the research is there to shore it up, and because in addition to that, it is popular, well, the representatives should support it because they're the ones who are supposed to be educated enough to make decisions for us, and because the people want it, the representatives have the obligation to do it.
Thank you very much to the both of you. It's been fantastic this evening. I have one question for each of you, so I'd like to start with Ben. You mentioned in referencing the broken window analogy that you're not really adding any new dollars, you're merely rearranging them.
Yes, ma'am.
And so with using that thought, how do you defend against the argument that making a minimum living wage levels out the playing field?
Sure, so leveling it out in the instance of they're going to be able to compete against the big businesses like Amazon and like Walmart. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important for us to give small businesses some kind of competitive advantage. If you think of it, we're in a big competition, and it's the small business, I think, as Aaron's picturing it for you guys, the small business versus the large business. One thing that I want to point out here is that whenever you make the small business lives harder and make all those things more expensive for them, what do they have to do? They have to, one, either cut their costs by cutting their employees, reducing their hours. Those things obviously don't help them compete against the big businesses. Or option number 3 for you here is increase their prices. Why are the big businesses beating out small businesses right now? It's because they can afford to only make a small profit margin, because their small percentage profit margin, when it turns into actual dollars, is extremely large. Like Walmart's profit margin is less than 1%, but they're still one of the biggest companies because that less than 1% for them of actual profit is gigantic for them. But for your average small mom and pop store, it isn't. That's why whenever you make it more expensive for the small mom and pop store, it actually makes it harder for them to compete with those big businesses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Aaron, I want to focus more specifically on one point, which I don't think we've dived into yet, which is how do you pay more to satisfy your workers if you simply don't have enough money following sales?
Sure. So again, there are some small businesses who I yield and I concede that would not have the opportunity to be able to pay for that. But that is, again, a very slim minority. 82% of small businesses have nothing to do with that. Again, another 85% of them have the ability to already afford it. So when we talk about this 3% that you are discussing, Some of them won't be able to. But I don't agree that that is their only option. When you are a small business owner, you are taking upon yourself a duty. And it's not necessarily something that you're forced to do, but it's something that you want to do. You're obligating yourself to do it. You're obligating yourself to work hard. You're obligating yourself to go against the large corporations that want to buy you out and take everything that you've worked hard to do for. So, like I said before, these are the people who are ready to work an extra shift. These are the people who are ready to rework their entire system in order for it to benefit them. And that's what I believe will happen if small businesses are put under this resolution. Many will benefit, many will be unharmed, and only very few will be harmed. Thank you.
There's one big important clarification point that I want to make when it comes to Seattle. Aaron mentioned how there's a 20% drop in unemployment, and I asked him back at the table, you mind if I just go ahead and see that? Because whenever I think of Seattle, I've never heard any numbers in my research talking about a 20% drop in unemployment. And he actually told me how it was a drop from 4.1% or from 4.1% to 3.6%. Notice how it isn't a 20% drop, but whenever you do the math, how 4.1 to 3.6 roughly is a 20% drop in percentage points from those individual percentages. So when it comes down to it, there wasn't a 20% overall drop in Seattle. By contrast, what I believe actually happened in Seattle was people were leaving Seattle, and whenever you actually look at the evidence that I showed to you, in a 3-to-1 ratio, you hurt those low-wage workers. If you want to vote for who actually helps those low-wage workers, I think what's best for us to have here is that lack of a 3-to-1 damaging on those low-wage workers when it comes to Seattle. Those two big questions that I brought up to you are the two biggest ones for the round. What was the first big question? What is best for those individual workers, those low-wage workers in those areas? I didn't want to just read to you Economic Policy Institute studies or read to you economist interpretation. I want to show to you what actually happens in the real world. And in Baltimore, whenever they only had a 43% increase, what you saw were 60,000 people lost their jobs. Why was this so? Because it became more expensive for a business to hire individuals. So the question of, does it hurt small businesses? Absolutely yes. But did it also hurt the workers? It also hurt the workers as well. The Congressional Budget Office tells us that at 3.7 million workers are going to lose their jobs at this $15 an hour minimum wage, which then begs the next question. Ben, why did you pick $15 an hour as your livable minimum wage? The first point that I want to bring up for you here is federal minimum doesn't change. Federal minimum doesn't change. If you have a minimum, it can't shift by definition. If it's a minimum on the federal scale, meaning it isn't a minimum by state, locality, or city. My next point for you here is MIT actually estimates it to be $16. So if you're catering to the minimum here, in order for it to be a minimum, it even probably would have to be higher. But I picked 15 was because the House passed it recently, and it's the one whenever you Google living wage, it pulls up on the first 20 pages of Google. Next, you bring up the question that I really have for us: what is best for the small business? How can small businesses compete against those large businesses? Because like Aaron mentioned, that's kind of what we're trying to go for here. What best helps those small business? I don't believe that whenever you make a small business and make their input costs more, that you're actually helping them. Like we talked about, small businesses, whenever their input costs go up, they have to respond in a couple different ways. Either they're cutting workers, cutting hours, or increasing their prices. All of those things actually hamper their ability to deal with and to compete with those bigger corporations, those bigger businesses by contrast. And it actually shows to us how whenever you put into place this federal minimum of this living wage, you are guaranteed to hurt small businesses. Seattle and Baltimore both show to us that you also hurt the low-wage workers as well by leading to massive unemployment to the tune of almost 4 million individuals being unemployed. Thank you so much.
Judges ready? Ben ready? Let us begin. So at the beginning of my closing remarks, I would like to make a few clarifying points. I did not mean to indicate that there was actually a 20 percentage points, like 20% less people, 20% of all the population of Seattle got jobs. The only time there's been 20% unemployment in United States history was during the Great Depression, so I didn't mean to mislead anyone by that. But what we see is that there is still 20% less people who are unemployed in Seattle than there were before. So now a next clarification that I would like to make, he went on to say there were only about 550,000 people who are living on the federal minimum wage. That's actually how many people are living below the federal minimum wage, such as servers who are earning less and then it gets made up through tips. In reality, it's 1.8 million Americans who are on the federal minimum wage, and I believe it's somewhere around 3 million Americans who are on state minimum wages. So moving on from that, his point for why Seattle still stands is because he said he believes the reason why unemployment went down is because people left, but he hasn't explained why they left. He explained why businesses may have left, but he hasn't explained why hundreds of thousands of people would suddenly uproot their entire lives and leave Seattle suddenly because they're being paid more wages. He hasn't refuted how Paychex still ranks it as the sixth best city, tongue twister, for small business growth. And again, in regards to his Baltimore example, Baltimore just isn't a great example for anything, neither is Detroit. They're cities that are struggling. And moving on from that, I would like to talk about what this debate has truly boiled down to. This debate has boiled down to, so what is the best for small businesses? Of course. But my opponent has only been talking about the 3% that are outside of family-owned businesses, that are outside of the businesses that are already paying substantially more than the minimum wage. So even when it comes to this 3%, as I have said time and time and again throughout this round, not all of them are going to struggle. But even if they did, it's 3%. What we are doing here, I know we're talking big picture stuff here and it's kind of dangerous, but we're doing what's for the greater good of small businesses. And what is that is to increase their competitive abilities with large corporations. What does that is increasing their productivity. Turnover rates go down. In Seattle, the turnover rates went down 8% after the minimum wage hikes. And these are the things that can benefit small businesses because they're not spending as much money on rehiring and retraining, and it benefits them by being able to allow them to retain the relationships they form with their new employees. So, and in one quick response to his argument for why $15 should be recognized as a living minimum wage, I just disagree fundamentally because the House has done things wrong in the past. The House voted to pass things revolving around slavery that I disagree with. The House has done many things that I think are absurd. And just because something pops up on the front page of Google does not mean it is true. So now I'd like to just sum up this debate with arguing for a negative side because it's what will benefit small businesses. It will bring jobs back to the economy from the welfare state. It will help them compete with big businesses, and it will improve worker productivity. Thank you.
So we are going to ask our debaters to take their seat back in the audience for a couple of minutes while we open up our voting. This voting is more exciting than American Idol, more exciting than going to the poll on ballot day, right? And if I'm right, I can't see it, but is it up there? Okay, so according to my notes, if you would like to vote, if you would like to participate, you should be able to pull out the device in your pocket, if you have one. If you brought your own laptop, iPad, mainframe computer, you can pull it out. And if you go to menti.com and use the code 236521, you'll get two options there. The affirmative was Ben, the negative was Aaron. So if you believe Ben was the victor in the debate, you'll vote affirmative. If you believe Aaron was the victor, you will vote negative. We'll give everybody, go ahead.
If you do not have a smartphone that allows you to do the capabilities of casting your vote or you're running into an issue, we do have some staff members who are just roaming where you can raise your hand and they will come over and record your vote and ensure that we add it to the final count. So we'll give you a few minutes. We don't have any I voted stickers, unfortunately. But feel free to share on every form of social media. I think our staff is still walking around if you need a paper ballot. Looks like everybody's voting. I'm just going to take another quick informal poll as you finish up your voting. How many of you, not mentioning a party, but regardless of party, would like to see these two national finalists competing for public office themselves someday? Just a show of hands? There we go. I think that's an affirmative, but... So as we are tabulating the votes, I think our final round judges are writing some notes. They're going to reveal their final decisions in just a moment. It looks like a lot of our audience has submitted their votes. So that gives us a couple of minutes. And my job is to cover the time until those votes are in. So what you're going to hear is a couple of jokes that Ronald Reagan used to tell. There we go. Going straight to the source material. I don't have the year, the date, or the specific source, but I'm going to do my best. So one of the jokes that Ronald Reagan used to like to tell, Ronald Reagan was known as an optimist. And so he told a story about this family, and they had two young boys. And if you've heard this before, you'll enjoy it just as much this time, I promise you. They had two young boys, and one of these young boys was just an endless optimist. No matter what happened to him, he would smile and be confident that it was wonderful. The other one, just a pessimist of the worst order. No matter what happened to him, it was the most terrible thing that ever happened to anyone in the history of the entire world. So the parents were a little worried about their boys, and they took them to this psychologist and told him their predicament, and he said, I've got a solution for you. I want you to bring your boys back tomorrow. We're going to set up a little experiment. We're going to cure them both. So next day they come back. They take the first son, the pessimist, and they put him in this room. And inside the room is everything you could ever imagine a kid would want. Video games, toys, stuffed animals, cake, cupcakes, candy, fancy socks, dapper shoes, wonderful hair product, whatever a young boy might want. And they put him in the room and they say, everything in here is for you. Enjoy. Shove him in, close the door. They walk to the next room with the optimistic young man, and there they've filled up the entire room with horse manure. And they say, everything in this room, take a look around, is for you. Shove him in, close the door. He says, all right, it should take about an hour. We'll come back, they'll both be cured. So in an hour, they come back. They open door to the first room, and sitting in the middle of the room, crying his little eyes out. Everything in the room is untouched, even the hair cream. And he goes, I don't know, if I play the game, I'm going to lose. Or the video game's going to become outdated. I'm going to need to get a whole new system. If I text somebody, I'm not going to have the coolest apps, I'm not happy. I'm not happy here or ever. And they go, okay, all right, well, that didn't work for this young man, but the second room had to have worked. So they open the door, and with the biggest smile you've ever seen on the face of anyone, this young man is leaping around from spot to spot with a big smile on his face. I go, what? Why are you so happy? And he said, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. All right, I've only got 2 more jokes, so I'm just checking in with the final round judges. I'm still counting. All right. Next joke. This is a joke that President Reagan used to tell to some of his education audiences. So if he was talking to a group of teachers or principals or counselors or whoever might come to the Capitol, or if he was out making a speech somewhere, it was a joke about hard work. So there was a farmer who moved to Iowa and took over a piece of farmland. And it was just an area that hadn't been tended to very much ever. So after many, many months of tilling the soil and pulling out all the weeds and moving the rocks and planting these different crops, he had turned it into something pretty respectable, he thought. And he wanted to show the town celebrity, who was the local pastor. So he invites the pastor down one day after church. And he brings him out. He's walking him around the fields and showing him the different crops. He goes over here and he pulls a potato out of the ground. And he goes, the pastor looks at him and looks at the potato and smiles and said, the Lord has certainly blessed this land. That's a wonderful potato. And they walk over to the next set of crops, and it's some carrots, and he pulls a carrot out, and it's a big orange carrot, one of the most beautiful carrots you've ever seen. And the pastor looks at it and says, it's a wonderful carrot. The Lord has certainly blessed this land. Now the farmer's getting a little frustrated. Feels like maybe he's not quite getting enough credit for the crops that are grown and how beautiful they are, but he decides he's going to go to one last part, a part he's particularly proud of, and it's the corn. And they walk over to the corn stalks, and he pulls an ear of corn off one of the stalks and folds down the corn silk, and you can see it's one of the most beautiful ears of corn that's ever been grown in the history of this county. And the pastor looks at it and he smiles. He says, the Lord has certainly blessed this land. That's a wonderful piece of corn. Finally, the farmer looks at him and says, I wish you had seen this land when God was working it by himself. All right. I'm looking around. How are we doing on the ballots? It looks like we're coming up soon here. We got two more minutes or 2 more jokes? 2. I only have 1 more joke. I can't do 2 more jokes. All right. Okay, so 1 more joke. We'll make it last 2 minutes. So this is a joke about a 3-legged chicken. So there's a salesman, and he's driving down a country road, and he's driving down the road. He looks out the window, and there's a chicken running by next to him. He looks out the window, and the chicken's got 3 legs, and you think that's kind of strange. He's going about 30 miles an hour, and he's a salesman, so he's type A, and he's pretty competitive. He steps on the gas a little bit, takes it up to 40 miles an hour, take that, chicken. Chicken can beat me. I'm a salesman. Looks out the window. The chicken speeds up. It's going 40 miles an hour. He goes, all right, this is a rental. Who cares? I'm going 50. So he takes it. He's going 50 miles an hour. He looks out the window. Chicken catches up. No problem, right? He goes, oh my gosh, this is one fast chicken. He's like, all right, I'm just going to step on it. I'm going to floor it. This chicken can't keep up with me. And before he can step on it, the chicken just takes off, leaves him in the dust, a big cloud of dust. It turns down a country road, and there's a singular farmhouse alone in the distance. And he's like, all right, I'll bite. I got to go see what's going on with this chicken. So he turns up the road, pulls up to the farm, and there, sitting on the porch, is a farmer and his wife. And the salesman puts the car in park. All right, we're getting him. Okay. Puts the car in park and hops out, kills the engine, kind of walks up to the farmer and his wife and says, did you guys see a three-legged chicken run by here? And they look at him. Yeah. He goes, do you happen to know anything? I've never seen a three-legged chicken before. Do you know anything about this three-legged chicken? They look at him and they smile and they go, yeah. They kind of stare at each other for a second, and he goes, maybe you could tell me? And they go, yeah. And they say, yeah, we bred the chicken. We bred him that way. We like to breed him with 3 legs. And he goes, that makes sense. Why? They look at him again and they say, well, when it was just me and Ma here, the farmer puts his arm around his wife and says, well, we both like the chicken leg. It's our favorite part when we eat dinner. Then Junior came along, and he points inside the house, and there's a little guy who pokes his head out, and he says, Junior came along, and his favorite part is the chicken leg, too. So we made a chicken with 3 legs. So everybody would be happy at dinner. Looks at him and goes, wait a second, so how does it taste? He stares at him for a second and goes, I don't know. We haven't been able to catch him. All right, there we go. All right. Okay, we have results. And thank goodness, because I was out of jokes. Okay, so with that, before we announce our winner, we're going to invite our final round judges up on stage. And just to make it even more exciting, we're going to announce our winner last, and we're going to recognize all of our debaters from the past couple of days here. So if I could have our final round judges come up here to help me hand out the trophies for all of our competitors and take some photographs. So once again, let's give a round of applause to our final round judges. And so the first group of students that we are going to recognize are those who qualified for the Great Communicator National Championship. Each of these qualifiers is going to receive a $1,500 scholarship. So there are 8 of them. When I call you, please come to the stage for your trophy and to take a picture with our judges. So first up, Valerie Wang. Valerie is an incoming senior at Richard Montgomery High School in Rockville, Maryland, a woman of many accomplishments, currently the newspaper editor, dance team captain, and an officer in the National Art Honor Society. After she graduates high school, she plans to go into business management or entrepreneurship. Congratulations, Valerie. Next up is Harmon Bands. Harmon's a graduate of Oak Park High School in Oak Park, California, and will be attending Moore Park College this fall, followed by UC Berkeley to finish a degree in finance. Harmon is also a member of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum. So congratulations to Harmon. And a reminder, if you're not yet a member, please sign up and join us. Next up, Nick Simila. Nick is from Warminster, Pennsylvania, where he's an incoming senior at William Tennant High School. Once he graduates, he intends to major in history or philosophy with a minor in English literature. Congratulations, Nick. Next up is Haley Bogler. Haley recently graduated from Lebanon High School in Missouri. She'll be attending the University of Central Missouri this coming fall and plans to study forensics and psychology. Congratulations, Haley. Next up is Angelo Thomas. Angelo Thomas is a rising senior at Claremont High School in Claremont, California. So congratulations, Angelo. Next up is Miles Ventura. Miles is from Lynbrook, New York, a recent graduate of Chaminade High School. He'll be attending Binghamton University as a political science major who hopes to one day transfer to West Point Military Academy. Congratulations, Miles. Next up is Jacqueline Way. Jacqueline graduated from Plano West Senior High School in Texas. In the fall, she'll be attending Harvard University and intends to major in economics. Congratulations, Jacqueline. Next up, we have Timothy Lindsay. Timothy is from Sherwood Forest, California. He graduated from Village Christian High School and will be attending Biola University this fall, where he plans to study computer science with a focus in robotic prosthesis. Congratulations, Timothy. All right. Next up are our quarterfinalists. So each of our quarterfinalists will be awarded a $2,500 scholarship. So first up, Peter Zhang. Peter is a rising senior at Montgomery Blair High School in Silver Spring, Maryland. Plans to major in computer science and philosophy after high school. Congratulations, Peter. Next up is Asher Gladstone. Asher is an incoming senior at Syosset High School in New York. In addition to being a skilled debater, he's the senior class president and president of the forensics team. Congratulations, Asher. Next up is Malia Morgan. Malia graduated from Central High School in Springfield, Missouri. In the fall, she will attend Harvey Mudd College and major in astrophysics. Congratulations. And Asa Scott is next. Like Malia, Asa is a recent graduate of Central High School in Springfield, Missouri, and will be attending the University of Tulsa on a pre-law track. Congratulations, Asa. Asa is also sporting a fancy pair of jelly bean socks, so take a look at them later. There you go. Next up, our semifinalists. So each of our semifinalists will take home a $5,000 scholarship. First up, Christopher Maximos. Christopher is a recent graduate from the Del Barton School in Morristown, New Jersey. Next year, he'll attend Stanford University, where he'll study international relations and history. Congratulations, Chris. Next up, our other semifinalist, Ellen Taylor. Ellen is from Flower Mound, Texas, a recent graduate of Sterling Academy. She will be attending Southern Methodist University in the fall, where she plans to study statistical science with a minor in Arabic. Congratulations, Ellen. Alrighty. So now I'm going to invite both of our finalists to the stage as we announce our national champion. So both of you can come up. I'll give a little bit of their credentials, and then we'll announce the winner. So Ben Lux. Ben graduated from the Hearts of Mary Academy, located in Denton, Texas, and will be attending the University of Dallas and will major in biology. A fun fact about Ben, as you saw in the program, he was once on the show Barney and Friends. That's right, some happy memories for many of us. And Aaron Ravine is a rising senior at Stamford High School in Connecticut. Aaron and his twin sister Carla were both born in New York to Cuban and Kurdish immigrants, and after he graduates high school, he intends to study law. All right, congratulations. So our national runner-up will receive a scholarship of $7,500. Our national champion will receive a scholarship of $10,000. I think we had our closest audience vote ever. The audience vote was 98 to 97. Which in many congressional districts triggers a recount. But not here. We trust the technology. It's been vetted. The 2019 Great Communicator Debate Series national champion on a 4-1 overall vote. Congratulations, Aaron Ravine. And let's also give a big hand to our runner-up, Mr. Ben Lux. Congratulations.